God told Abraham to kill the son he had waited 25 years to receive. And Abraham got up early the next morning and left. No argument, no negotiation, no explanation from God. 25 years earlier, Abraham had been given a promise, descendants as numerous as the stars, a nation, a future, a name that would outlive him. 25 years of waiting, 25 years of watching his wife grow old, 25 years before a child was born to parents who should have been long past the age of children. And then, Isaac, the proof that God kept his word, the living evidence that the promise was real. And then, the same voice that had made the promise, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. Go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." No explanation, no reason given, no promise that this would make sense, just a command, and a mountain, and a knife. Now here is what makes this story unlike almost anything else in the Bible. This is not a God who is learning about Abraham for the first time. This is a God who, according to Scripture, knows everything, who sees the end from the beginning, who knew Abraham before Abraham knew himself, who knew this moment was coming before Isaac was ever born. So why is he watching? Why does an all-knowing God wait on a mountain to see what a man will do with a knife? That question has outlived every generation that has told this story. It has never been closed. To understand the weight of what God was asking, you have to understand who Isaac was. Not just a son, not just a child born after decades of waiting. Isaac was the proof that God kept his word. God had promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars. God had said, "Through Isaac your offspring will be reckoned," not through Ishmael, not through anyone else, through Isaac. This specific son, this son whose birth had seemed impossible, was the only visible path through which that promise could continue. And now the same God who made that promise was asking Abraham to destroy the person carrying it. This is the collision at the heart of the story. Not simply, can you obey a difficult command, but can you still trust the promise when obeying seems to make the promise impossible? Can you trust a God who appears to be dismantling his own word with his own hands? This same Abraham had negotiated with God over Sodom. He had pushed back. What if there are 50 righteous people? What if there are 45? What if there are 10? Abraham had argued over the fate of an entire condemned city. For his own son, the story records no protest, no question directed at God, no negotiation, just the early morning, the saddled donkey, the wood, the knife, the road. 3 days of walking toward a mountain without a single recorded protest to God. That silence is one of the strangest things in the entire book of Genesis. A man who argued over Sodom said nothing for his son. Why? 3 days into the journey, Abraham sees the mountain. He tells his servants to stay, and then he says something the story records without commentary. "Stay here while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. We will come back. Both of us." The plural matters. Centuries later, the writer of Hebrews looks back at the entire event and tells us what Abraham had reasoned. Abraham believed that God could raise Isaac from the dead. He may still have hoped that God would intervene, but Hebrews tells us his reasoning went further. Even if Isaac died, Abraham believed death could not cancel the promise. That conviction is deep enough to speak in the plural, while Isaac carried the wood, and Abraham carried the fire and the knife. That earlier silence begins to look different now. Abraham was not simply obeying without thinking. He was obeying while believing something about God that made obedience possible, even when obedience made no sense. They walked together up the mountain, father and son, the wood on Isaac's shoulders, the fire and the knife in Abraham's hands. And then Isaac speaks. "Father, here is the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" A question that carries everything. Isaac does not know. He sees what his father is carrying, he sees what is missing, and he asks. Abraham answers, "God himself will provide the lamb." And they walk on together. A father who knows, a son who does not, both walking toward the same altar. Isaac's voice disappears from the story after that. The text does not tell us what he thought. It does not tell us what he felt. It tells us only that he was there, bound, waiting. Two silences on the same mountain. A father whose protest is never recorded. A son whose question remains hanging in the air. Where is the lamb? The angel intervenes at the last possible moment. Not before the journey, not during the 3 days, not when Isaac asked about the lamb, only when Abraham reaches for the knife. And then the voice comes. "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the boy." And then, "Now I know that you fear God." Now I know. Not knowledge arriving late, knowledge that could only exist this way. There is a difference between knowing what a man will do and that man doing it. Abraham's faith had been tested for decades. It had survived years of waiting, an impossible birth, a wilderness. But faith that has only been believed is not the same as faith that has been spent. On the road to Moriah, it was still a conviction. On the mountain, with the knife already raised, it became an act. Genesis does not frame this test as God collecting a hidden fact about Abraham. It frames the verdict after Abraham's trust has become something he has actually done. What God knew as truth now existed as an event, in history, in flesh, on a mountain. Moriah was not theater performed for an audience of one. It was the moment belief stopped being a thing Abraham carried in his chest and became a thing that happened. Before Moriah, Abraham believed. On Moriah, that belief became an act. Genesis does not explain how an all-knowing God experiences that moment. It only insists the moment mattered. Only after the knife is stopped does the ancient context become decisive. Child sacrifice was not foreign to the ancient world. Some cultures believed the gods could demand the most costly offering a parent possessed. Entire religious systems were built on that belief. And what could cost more than a son? Abraham lived in a world where a command like this was not unimaginable. So when God said, "Take your son and offer him," Abraham understood the terrible meaning of those words. But Genesis brings Abraham to the edge of that world and does not end where those other altars ended. A ram caught in a thicket, not a son. In a world where gods were believed to demand children, this God stopped the knife. Isaac is released. Another sacrifice is provided. The substitution does not erase the terror of the command. It answers it. God told Abraham to kill his son, and he said yes. Not because he felt nothing, not because he failed to understand what was being asked, but because everything he had lived with God, the long waiting, the impossible promise, the child born to old parents, had produced something in him that was not certainty about outcomes. It was conviction about a person. We will come back. He did not know how. He knew toward whom he was walking. And when Abraham finally looked up, the ram was there. The knife stopped. Isaac lived. Another sacrifice was provided. So why test a man whose answer God already knew? Genesis never says that God needed new information. What it shows us is that the verdict came only after Abraham's trust had become action. Now I know. Moriah revealed how far Abraham's trust actually went when the commands seemed to destroy the promise. And it revealed something to everyone who would read the story after him. The God who asked for Isaac did not take Isaac. He stopped the knife. He provided the sacrifice. He preserved the son, and he kept the promise alive. Abraham walked up the mountain believing that God could remain faithful even beyond death. He walked down knowing that the promise had survived the knife.